It is Thursday, November 11th, and there's a few brand new Switch stories we need to talk about today, starting with the fact that Grand Theft Auto Trilogy, the definitive edition, has now released on the Nintendo Switch, and I want to share with you guys some of the key differences on that version versus something like the PS5 version, as Game Explain does a fantastic side-by-side video, and I want to talk through that with you guys today. Then we also have to cover the big update that came to Nintendo Switch Online in the form of a new app that has not been there up to this point in time, and the big talking point for today's video is the reports and rumors that suggest that Metroid Prime 1 Remake is indeed done with development and could be around the corner from releasing next year. What's up, Nation? If it's your first time on the channel, make sure you join Sunbro Nation by subscribing below, hit the like button on this video if you enjoy it today, and make sure you turn on your bell notification icon so you're kept up to date with all the newest gaming news. Now, as I mentioned, guys, we're covering a few different stories today, and I want to kick it off with Grand Theft Auto the Trilogy, the definitive edition, as it is now actually out and available for download through the Nintendo Switch eShop, and if you want to get this game physically, you will, of course, have to wait until December 7th, as that is when the physical version releases, but there is some controversy around that as well, because it requires additional download, and we actually don't know how many games are on that cartridge when you do pick it up at retail. But regardless, that is not what we are talking about today. We are talking about the feature comparison and really the overall performance of the game in contrast to how it runs on something like the PlayStation 4 or 5 console. Game Explain did a video that I will have linked in the description down below and have some footage of on screen now, so you guys can kind of see for yourself. But it is pretty apparent that they did definitely have to make some technical sacrifices when it comes to things like certain lighting effects, lack of certain shadows and draw distances and fog and things like that. So there was definitely, if you just look at them side by side, you see clearer textures, you see better overall color accuracy and more color pop, in the PlayStation version, which you should expect whenever you're talking about a $500 stationary console. Like, obviously it should be able to run the game better, but there's also a lot of talk about how Rockstar really across the board did not optimize this game before release, and it maybe needed a little bit longer before it was pushed out. And there was a lot of interesting things about how we found out about this game, because it went through the ratings board things before it was really announced. Then Rockstar all of a sudden put out like a very quick teaser trailer that really just showed the icon of Grand Theft Auto the Trilogy, the definitive edition, without any gameplay footage whatsoever. And then all of a sudden we're getting geared up for release, and we have two different dates when it comes to physical and digital. So there's a lot of indications that maybe this was just rushed out to get out to the market before the holiday season actually fully kicked off. And I think that that's kind of what we're seeing here, because even on the PS5 version, as it does run at 60 frames per second, there is still a lot of talk around frame drops, and when you take certain turns and things, that you can clearly see the frames drop off, especially if you're going fast in the environment and things like that. And I do think that, unfortunately the Switch version is not running at 60 frames per second, and I don't think it's even anywhere close to that, as when you do see those fast side-by-side comparisons take place, it is clear that there is another level of stutter that is on the Switch version versus something like the PS5. All that being said, I am more hyped for the Switch version still, even though it's clearly not the best way to play the game, for the simple fact that I think these games shine in portable mode, but I do think that they need patches and upgrades to run more efficiently, across the board with really all platforms, but definitely on the Switch right now. And while I don't think we'll really see the graphics patched up at all, like, I think the graphics, the way they look on the Switch is how they will look for the overall lifetime of the game. I do hope that they can do something in terms of those frame drops, because some of them are a little bit jarring. And obviously the original games back on the PS2 suffered from some of those issues, but we're talking about 20 plus years for a lot of these games in the past since they were originally released, and we really shouldn't be dealing with that in today's day and age. So it is one of those things that I'm a little bit of a mixed reaction. I haven't played it myself yet, of course, because I am actually waiting to get the physical release, which I don't know really why I am, because I just like to still have the physical collection behind me, and I like to collect games. But honestly, the physical edition of this game is kind of a joke with the requirement of additional download out of the gate to even be able to play these games in their entirety. Like, I'm fully prepared to buy this cartridge and maybe only actually have access to Grand Theft Auto 3 out of the gate, and I have to download Vice City and San Andreas to actually be able to play them. So that might be what I'm looking at. I almost want to double dip and get it so I can kind of have my first hands-on impressions right away, but because of how Rockstar is releasing this thing, I will have to be waiting until December 7th to secure my copy. But I really want to hear from you guys what your personal thoughts and opinions are now that these footage and the hands-on impressions and everything are out there around Grand Theft Auto Trilogy, the definitive edition online. And what is kind of your overall opinion now that we can clearly see the differences in the versions of the games on, maybe you own a PS5 or you own a Series X, like, are you just going to go ahead and pick it up on that and forego the option to play these things portably? Or is it something that they're still close enough in overall performance that, it's going to be worth it for you either way to pick it up on the Switch to have that portable option? So please share all your thoughts and opinions on all things Grand Theft Auto Trilogy Definitive Edition in the comments down below. Now, the next story we're talking about today is actually a surprise one that came out of left field, and Nintendo just decided to randomly announce that the Twitch app is now supported on the Nintendo Switch console, and you can go into the eShop and download it as we speak, and surprisingly, it runs very well. It's very responsive. You can switch between streams very easily. It's a nice navigatable layout. Like, I'm a big fan of seeing more apps like this come to the Nintendo Switch platform, and it's surprising that it's taken this long for certain apps. We're still waiting on Netflix over there to make a surprise return to the Nintendo platforms, as we had that back on the Wii, and it is just mysteriously missing from the Switch, which now that we have the OLED model, it's like, come on, why are we not watching Netflix on our Switch? But that's a different conversation for a different day. We at least do have a new media app that will, of course, allow you to watch gamers stream live, and you have the access to all of your favorite Twitch streamers now on the Switch, which I think is great, because for people who, I normally watch Twitch on my tablet that I have, but if you don't have a tablet and you only have a phone, you might want to watch things on a bigger display, and I think something like a 7-inch OLED is definitely the best way to watch it. But even the 6.2 base model screen will still be larger than a lot of people's phones out there, so I think this is a win overall. And the biggest thing I was relieved to see is that it's not a clunky, slow experience. Like, it doesn't feel like it's a bad way to watch Twitch. It actually feels like it's extremely responsive, really showing off the fact that they took their time making sure it was optimized for the Switch. And I do think that that's a good thing to see, because if we would have got the app but it's very slow and laggy like you sometimes see with certain Switch apps, it would have been disappointing. But this does actually appear to be another great avenue to watch Twitch if you are a fan of that. So again, this is live in the eShop that you can go in and download yourself right now, and I do want to hear from you guys on your thoughts around this Twitch addition to the Nintendo eShop as an app, and whether or not you think this is any kind of indication that we can expect more media apps to come, such as Netflix and the other big guys that are missing. So please share all your thoughts and opinions on this Switch addition to Nintendo Switch Online in the comments down below. Now, the last story we're talking about today is a big one for all of us Metroid fans, because it involves the fact that Metroid Prime 1 Remake should indeed be done with development. And while there's been a lot of talk and debate online around whether or not we would see Metroid Prime Trilogy HD come to the Switch all in one package, similar to how we saw it released without the HD, of course, back on the Wii, or whether or not we would start to see individual releases of these Metroid Prime titles, has been talked about and debated a lot online over the last few months, because there's been new insiders and new reports that have come out that suggest that instead of the trilogy format, which we saw take place on the Wii, that indeed on the Switch we would actually see individual releases, and in turn the games would be upgraded and overhauled and really be more of a remaster or remake depending on what Nintendo decides to do here. But they of course would be completely packaged and sold separately. So I want to start off this conversation today by hopping over to VGC, where we can get all the details on the reason that Metroid Prime 1 Remake being completed is in the news today, and I want to share my opinions on when I think we could see this thing released, because it could be a surprise title for something like a February Nintendo Direct. The Switch re-release of Metroid Prime 1 is clearly finished, it's claimed. Nintendo insiders suggest development was completed over the summer. An unannounced Switch re-release of Metroid Prime is already complete, according to a reliable Nintendo insider. Emily Rogers, an industry insider with a long track record of accurate Nintendo information, stated on Twitter on Wednesday that it was hard for her to believe that the game is ready to go. She's quoted here saying, "I'm pretty confident Metroid Prime 1 wrapped up development over the summer." Rogers said, "I hope we still see the entire trilogy on Switch, but Prime 1 is clearly finished." Rogers stated in September that Nintendo was working on a re-release of Metroid Prime for Switch, separate from any potential trilogy plans, which VGC had heard separately from our own sources. "Last I heard, Nintendo was busy working on Metroid Prime 1 to celebrate the game's 20th anniversary in 2022, she tweeted at the time. "I'm not sure if we're getting a trilogy or just a re-release of the first game. I'm leaning towards the latter, but I hope we get the former." Rogers' claims were then backed up by VentureBeat reporter Jeff Grubb, who said he was aware of similar information. He's quoted here saying, "I think Nintendo will re-release Metroid Prime 1 on Switch instead of the trilogy," he tweeted last month. "It has been working on this for years, and when I first heard, everyone, including me, assumed it was the trilogy." He added, Emily Rogers mentioned this and I went back to look into it and I think she's right. Now, I then went to quickly hop over to Twitter to read Emily Rogers' response to a fan who essentially said, why did we hear about Trilogy in the past and now we're hearing it's a Prime 1 remake? So the exact statement he said here is, it kind of soured me that it was reported back in 2018, the whole trilogy is done and now we're just getting one of the three. Emily Rogers responded by saying the following, work on Metroid Prime 1 Remastered started around 2017 to 18. Original plan was to develop and release Prime 1 first, then use Prime 1's foundation, engine, tools, assets to recreate Prime 2 and 3 later. Nobody knows if the plans were changed or axed after COVID. She then goes on to say, it would be cool if Nintendo sticks to their original plan and brings all 3 Metroid Primes to Switch. I'm rooting for the best possible scenario here. Only thing I can confirm at the moment is that Prime 1 exists and it just wrapped up development over the summer. So I want to share with you all my thought process on this story because it does make a lot of sense that if people were originally hearing from insiders and connections that Metroid Prime, whether it be the trilogy or just Metroid Prime 1 is being worked on, a lot of people would just jump to the conclusion that that's probably Trilogy HD being released on the Switch, as a lot of us really thought that that's what we would get because those games already look incredible. If you guys don't remember, the GameCube was one of Nintendo's last consoles that they actually had current gen true power released on the platform that actually kept up and even could exceed the PS2's performance in a lot of ways. I know the Xbox was very powerful as well, but the GameCube was one of the leaders in overall horsepower in that generation, and Nintendo definitely took advantage of that, or Retro Studios rather, with Metroid Prime 1. Is that game to this day, if you just up-res it in an emulator and look at some of the footage, like, it looks incredible. And so I think a lot of fans assumed that we would just get kind of a, you know, up-resed version of all 3 of those classic games brought over to the Switch in one package, but you might think that Nintendo could be looking at a bigger picture here with the Metroid Prime franchise. As it was mentioned, this game is about to turn 20 years old, which is crazy, but that means there is an entire generation of players that most likely never played through any of these Metroid Prime games and maybe are a brand new fan due to the exposure of the 2D title like Dread. And you know, I think Nintendo really is trying to prop up this series in a big way for something like the release of Metroid Prime 4, as we saw them totally scrap the development. Of course, it was originally announced in 2017, then in early 2019 they actually reset the development of that game, gave it to Retro Studios because they were not happy in the direction that it was going. So for Nintendo to spend all that money and essentially just erase all the work that was already done on it, it probably means 2 things. The first being that they are actually really trying to push this game to be successful and they are going to spend money to do it. And the second thing being that it might not be that far along yet. Like, we've still been seeing Retro Studios post hiring listings on their website for things that key roles in the development of that game. And so, you know, it might not be something we see release until late into 2023 or even early 2024, which means Nintendo has all this time in between then to re-expose Nintendo fans to the Metroid Prime games, and they may want to just slow down and take time and release them individually at $60 a piece with some extra quality of life improvements to build up to the ultimate release of Prime 4. And while I don't want to spend $60 each time on these games, I will happily do it because they are all full-fledged adventures that take, I don't know, 20, 30 hours if you really want to 100% them, if not more. Maybe, I can't remember how many hours I put into Prime 1 my first time around, but it was definitely upwards of 40. So I do think that these are all full-length, great quality titles, and they're going to be enjoyed by the current fans if given the right quality of life improvements and just basic overall enhanced functionality. It'll also be interesting to see if we get things like dual analog controls, as if you guys don't remember, on the GameCube with button controls, you actually had to use the R button to aim as opposed to using something like the C stick to aim and move simultaneously. Now, I did not mind that personally. Of course, I don't know how that's aged over time because I've been purposely holding out on replaying these games in hopes that we will get them re-released on the Switch. But you know, I do think something like dual analog support could be good. They could definitely overhaul the map system, as the wire map thing is very disorienting if you don't know what you're doing when you're trying to navigate the game. And then I even think they could just do some basic overhaul, like, for instance, Prime Trilogy on the Wii was motion based only, so will we see something like the option for motion controls with the Joy-Cons, but then also have the option for traditional button style controls? Like, there's a lot of different ways that they could take this here, and I do think that releasing them one by one, slowly over the course, you know, maybe 6 to 9 months apart as we lead into the launch of Metroid Prime 4 is a really interesting prospect. And if this game is indeed done, I do think it could be one of those sleeper announcements that's a big surprise to either open up or close out next year's February Nintendo Direct. But guys, at this point in the video, I really want to hear from you on all your thoughts and opinions on really all the stories we talked about today, but definitely share with me your personal experience with Metroid Prime games, if you've played them at all, what you think about the reports that suggest that we are getting individual releases as opposed to a Prime Trilogy HD, and will you still buy these games at $60 a piece individually if they are indeed released individually, or is it something that you really wouldn't see the value in doing that since they all have been packaged as a trilogy before, and that's really the only way you want to see Nintendo release them? So please share all your thoughts and feelings and all the stories we talked about today in the comments down below before you leave the video, as I do look forward to getting a back and forth conversation started with you all around these topics. Thanks so much for watching the video today, everyone. I do truly appreciate you all sticking around until the end. I do at this point in the video want to invite you all one more time to join Sunbro Nation if you haven't done so already. Do so by subscribing below, hit the like button on your way out if you enjoyed it today, and make sure you turn on your bell notification icon so you're kept up to date with all the newest gaming news. That's gonna do it for me, guys. I hope you all have a great day. Sunbro Nation, out.